Over time, I've picked up a number of these budget DC gear motors online. They come in a bunch of different gear ratios, and I've used them in a number of different builds, but their product page only gives a no-load speed and some non-specific rated torque. That doesn't give a ton of info to go off of. So instead of spending a few more dollars on motors with a datasheet, naturally I decided to build a dyno. The goal was something that could give me torque and power curves for my various little motors here. I decided I wanted to do that with something called an inertial mass dynamometer. Some dynos might use an electric generator and measure the electric power to get mechanical power and torque. Others may use a brake with a lever arm on some sort of scale. For the latter, they rely on the relationship here between torque and a force applied at a radius away. An inertial mass dyno, on the other hand, relies on this relationship, where the torque is equal to the angular acceleration times the moment of inertia of whatever is being spun. And when looking at my new dyno, you can basically map each of those terms to one of these modules here. The encoder module measures angular acceleration, and the load module supplies all that sweet inertia. I decided to split them into separate modules in case I want to try out different measurements or load options down the line. The basic construction of both modules is generally the same, the rotating elements sandwiched between two frame elements, with thrust and radial bearings on both sides to keep things rolling smoothly. To maintain the preload in those thrust bearings, the two frames are attached to each other via these flexible elements. The flat-to-flat contact at the bolted interface forces the leaves into S-bends. This increases the stiffness, and therefore the preload. Taking a closer look at the encoder module specifically, the perimeter of the frame is also home to the encoder read head. Inside are 3 opto-interrupters, which detect the presence or absence of one of these teeth found on the encoder wheel. When the teeth go by one of the opto-interrupters, it generates a square wave pattern like this one, and the optos are positioned such that their waveforms are out of phase with each other. Only 2 at 90-degree offset are needed for the usual quadrature encoder setup, but I added a third for good measure, and for some tinkering I want to do. So how do we go from these square waves to our angular acceleration? Well, I know the angular distance from this falling edge to the next is 2 degrees, because that's the spacing of my encoder teeth, and I can measure the time elapsed between them, so I know I have degrees per second, or my angular velocity. Quick tangent, but now that we have the relationship between the square wave and velocity, I can also estimate the maximum resolvable velocity, aka the max RPM I can measure. My logic analyzer measures in megasamples per second, so I'm not too worried about that. No, the fuse in my system, so to speak, is the time it takes for the transistor inside the opto-interrupter to rise and fall. And wouldn't you know it, they're nice enough to give us a complicated-ass looking plot for that. My load resistance is 3.3 kiloohms, so I swagged both my rise and fall times to both be around 40 microseconds. 1 degree of rotation every 40 microseconds is 25,000 degrees a second, or over 4,000 RPM. Yeah, I don't trust the mechanics to even touch 1,000, so this is fine. Getting back to how I use those velocity measurements to get the angular acceleration I need, the acceleration is just the change in this velocity from one point to the next, divided by the time elapsed between them. Because of the noise and such, it's usually a bit trickier than that, but that's the gist of it. Getting back to the nuts and bolts, I wanted to be able to print those encoder teeth flat on the build plate, so I decided to split the rotating element in the encoder module into 2 halves, with a kinematic coupler between them. Both sides have the same interface features for the thrust bearing here and radial bearing here. The funky bits on the end, oh, the funky bits on the end. These are the couplers that handle the torque transfer between modules or from the motor to the modules. These couplers are a design I've been playing around with separate from the dyno, but decided this is as good a time as any to try them out in a real system. Verdict: I don't love them. But when I tried to summarize these little bastards in the first version of this script, it rambled on for minutes. So instead, I'll just link below to a more detailed write-up on their design, and if you'd be interested in a dedicated video on them, let me know in the comments. But the quick and dirty description is that they're couplers based on universal joints, and they're intended to be forgiving for both radial and angular misalignments between the input and output shafts. In this case, transferring the torque between the encoder module and load module. The load module is pretty much what it sounds like, some heavy spinning things. I designed it with the intention of being scalable. I can change out the collection of load plates to change the moment of inertia term I showed earlier. But why do I need to be able to vary the load? Taking a look back at that relationship to torque, if the torque is assumed to be constant, which it nominally is for the same motor, then the lower the value of I, or inertia, the higher the value of acceleration needed to cancel it out. But the faster it accelerates, the faster it gets to top speed, and the fewer data points I'm going to get as it's accelerating. So by upping my I lower the acceleration, and I buy myself some time to collect more data. To accomplish that scalability, I went with the same concept as in the encoder. A hub interfaces with the bearings, and has kinematic features on the other side. Each load plate then has a pair of kinematic features on either side, so they can just be stacked to achieve the desired load. then it gets capped off with another hub. I made different sizes of these printed turnbuckles to get the right preload with different stack dimensions. Now you may be wondering why I'm calling these 3D printed discs load plates. Well, I don't have any big plates of steel to make flywheels out of, but I do have balls. So I loaded up the printed discs with these steel bearing balls. I designed them to have an interference fit, and then capped them off with this retainer ring. I should note, this is definitely not the safest configuration for holding these steel balls. As the wheel spins, the centrifugal force is trying to fling these balls out like the slingshot ammo they are. Inserting the balls from the face, and having some more plastic in between to hold things, would definitely be a safer bet, but the radius the mass is at plays a big part in the moment of inertia, so if I could safely get the balls a bit further out, it was worthwhile. So I got out the napkin and did some estimating. The highest centrifugal force will be in the half-inch balls that are in the outermost ring. At 500 RPM, I get a centrifugal force of about 2 newtons, or a little under half a pound. I expect this to be within the range of what the interference fit alone can handle. But that's pretty difficult to predict in a 3D printed part, so I added the retainer rings as an additional line of protection. They have a very light interference fit over the tops of the balls. This is why the balls sit slightly proud of the surface of the disc. This ensures the ring is sharing the load with the interference fits, instead of taking some sort of impact load if the interference fit suddenly gave out. With the modules assembled, it's time to connect them together. These outer frames provide the interface between the two modules and generally stiffen things up. Now that I have everything assembled, there's just one thing I need to do before I can start producing those torque curves I'm after. I need to know the actual value for I that I've ended up with. I have estimates from Fusion, but the error of my torque measurements is directly proportional to the error of my inertia value. So I need to do some calibrating. Luckily, this is a pretty straightforward task in this situation. I just need to input a torque at known value and measure the angular acceleration. That'll give me the moment of inertia. To get my known torque, I made a pulley that attaches in place of where a motor would go. The pulley has a known diameter, so hanging a known weight from it gives me a known torque. Clearly, I've gone for the what's next to me right now version of this, where my known weight is a water bottle and a scale. By repeating this measurement with different known weights, I can also get an idea of the friction in my system. This method of calibrating also encourages hydration, which is always good. Checking my calibrated value against my Fusion 360 predictions gives a nice little sanity check. And with that, it's ready for some motor testing. I set up a couple of benchtop power supplies, one with the 3.3 volt logic level and the other for directly driving the test motor, and I collected data by connecting up my little logic analyzer to the outputs from the optos. To analyze the data, I just created a Jupyter notebook with some Python scripts that process the output from the logic analyzer. And finally, I get what I set out for. This is the plot for a 550 RPM 12 volt DC motor. And this is the one for 120 RPM at 24 volts. And here's that same one at 12 volts. Ooh, and here it is at 6. Oh, fuck. It broke. Yeah, the feelings about the coupler are complicated.